Red Bull didn't just launch a new car. They launched a new threat. Because what they revealed in Detroit isn't just a chassis or a concept, it's a warning. A warning to Ferrari, to Mercedes, and maybe to the FIA. They've just unveiled something nobody expected. And behind the show, behind the blue paint, there's a hidden story. One that could give Red Bull the biggest advantage of the hybrid era, and change how every other team designs their car. But that's not the shocking part. The real surprise is how quietly the FIA is letting it happen. And this is just the beginning. Red Bull chose Detroit, not Silverstone, not Monaco. Detroit. It wasn't random. It was Ford's territory, industrial, iconic, and very intentional. Because this launch wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about announcing power. Inside Central Station, under staged lighting and scripted precision, they pulled the cover off what they called a statement of intent. But what sat on that platform wasn't the real car. It was a shell, a showpiece, a decoy. Because the actual RB22, the one that's going to race, was never shown. It stayed in Milton Keynes, untouched, unseen, untested by the media. And that's the first sign that something's different. This isn't just a car. It's a turning point. For the first time in their history, Red Bull is not borrowing power. They're not negotiating with Honda behind the scenes. They're not badging a Renault block and calling it innovation. They're building their own engine, from the ground up, with Ford and with full control. But what makes that so risky is the timing. Because 2026 isn't business as usual. The engines are hybrid, but with no MGUH. The battery takes on more power than ever. The fuel is synthetic. The cooling envelope is tighter. The chassis is smaller. The cars are heavier in the wrong places. And the rules? They've changed almost everything, except for the pressure. Most teams are trying to survive that reset. Red Bull is trying to dominate it. And that tells you everything. Because when a team gives up external support, hires 600 new engineers, opens a dedicated engine facility, and co-develops its architecture with a multinational like Ford, they're not playing the same game anymore. They're not reacting. They're dictating. And the car they're hiding? The one they didn't show in Detroit? Wasn't hidden because it's unfinished. It was hidden because it's not supposed to be seen yet. Because under that carbon fiber, Red Bull might have done something nobody else was ready for. And what they just did could force the FIA to make a decision they've been avoiding for months. It starts with a number. Just one. Buried deep in the technical regulations. 16:1. That's the maximum compression ratio allowed in the new V6 engines. Not 16.5. Not 16.1. Exactly 16. No exceptions. On paper, that's simple. But Red Bull found the part no one paid attention to. The FIA only measures that ratio at room temperature. Not while the engine is running. Not when it's pushing 10,000 revolutions per minute at 150 degrees. Only cold. Only static. And that's where it begins. Because when an engine heats up, its parts expand. Metals shift. Clearances tighten. And that changes how compression behaves under stress. It's tiny fractions of a millimeter. But when controlled, it matters. A lot. Red Bull may have built an engine that passes every cold test, but acts very differently once it's hot. How? By using specific alloys, controlling expansion, designing chambers that subtly reshape themselves under thermal load. Not enough to break the rule, but enough to unlock more energy, more pressure, more power. The result? They might be producing up to 10 kilowatts more than expected. That's 13 horsepower. With no added weight, no battery draw, no regulation breach. Just physics. Used at the edge. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because this isn't just theory. This is already being noticed. Ferrari's simulations flagged it. Honda's test data doesn't align. And Mercedes? They haven't said a word. Which might be the loudest response of all. Because if Red Bull has really pulled this off, if this trick works race after race, then what happens next isn't just about engine power. It's about trust, interpretation, and whether the FIA is willing to step in or stay silent. And that silence could be more powerful than any engine on the grid. Ferrari didn't waste time. They sent a letter. So did Audi. Honda quietly supported it behind the scenes. 3 manufacturers, all demanding the same thing. Not a ban. Not a penalty. Just clarification. Is this legal? That was the question. Does the 16:1 ratio apply when the engine is hot? The answer? There was none. No public response. No internal update. No change to the testing procedure. The FIA said, nothing. And that silence? That's where everything changes. Because now we're not just talking about Red Bull's engine. We're talking about the people who are supposed to govern it. Here's the truth no one in the paddock will say out loud. The FIA knows. They've seen the data. They've seen the requests. They've read the simulation reports from Ferrari. They've received the modeling analysis from Audi. And they're not acting. Why? Because the moment they confirm the loophole exists, they admit they wrote the rule wrong. They admit the test is flawed. And they risk triggering a political war between teams, manufacturers, and billion-dollar partnerships. Now think about who's involved. Red Bull, Ford, a brand new engine department built from scratch. Over 600 engineers. For years of investment. A global car manufacturer stepping into F1 for the first time in 2 decades. If the FIA moves now, if they shut down the compression trick, they don't just hit Red Bull, they hit Ford. And that's something the FIA can't afford. Not right now. Not at the start of their most ambitious regulation cycle in years. They promised new teams a level playing field. They promised manufacturers freedom to innovate. And if their first move is to slam the door shut, they lose credibility with the very companies they brought in. So instead, they wait. They say nothing. They monitor. And that delay? That hesitation? Is already shaping the season. Because if Red Bull and Mercedes are already pushing the edge, and the FIA refuses to clarify what's legal and what's not, then the gray area becomes the real rulebook. And that's what scares the other teams. Not the engine, not the power, but the idea that the FIA has already lost control. The story isn't just about horsepower anymore. It's about precedent. Because if this trick stands, if Red Bull races with it, wins with it, and the FIA does nothing, then the real message is clear. If you're bold enough to go first, and quiet enough not to get caught, you won't be stopped. And that changes everything. Because in Formula 1, the moment a loophole is proven to work, it stops being a secret. It becomes a blueprint. Other teams start reverse engineering. Suppliers scramble to copy the design. And in just a few months, what was once a gray area becomes standard practice. That's how this sport works. We've seen it before. Think back to 2019. Ferrari's sudden engine surge. Massive straight-line speed. Lap time gains that didn't match the data. Teams complained. The FIA investigated. And then, nothing. No public report. No technical directive. Just a quiet agreement between Ferrari and the FIA. Sealed behind closed doors. A scandal, buried. And the following season? Ferrari dropped back. Massively. The conclusion was obvious. But never confirmed. And that silence? Damaged the FIA for years. Now it's happening again. This time, it's Red Bull. This time, it's compression ratio. This time, the stakes are even higher. Because 2026 isn't just a new season. It's a full reset. New power structures. New manufacturers. New fans watching. New promises made. The FIA built this as the clean slate. The balanced era. The one where no team would dominate from the start. But if Red Bull's engine hits the ground half a second quicker, and if that advantage is tied to an interpretation the FIA refuses to clarify, then everything breaks down. The integrity of the rules. The trust between teams. The illusion of fairness. Because let's be honest, this isn't just a question of legality. It's a question of access. Who knew first? Who was brave enough to exploit it? And who is being protected by silence? Those are the questions circulating behind the paddock walls. And no one wants to answer them. Not yet. Let's start with Red Bull. If this works, if the compression trick delivers power reliably, they're not just ahead, they're alone. Because this isn't about race pace. It's about development pace. If Red Bull starts 2026 with a clear engine advantage, they can pivot early. Shift focus to reliability, to battery deployment, to aerodynamic fine-tuning. While others are still trying to solve the fundamentals, Red Bull will already be in phase 2. That's how dominance begins. Not with big gaps, but with early clarity. And that's why Ferrari is worried. Because Ferrari doesn't just have a technical problem. They have a political one. They raised the flag. They asked the question. And they were ignored. Now what? Do they copy the design? Do they risk reliability by changing chamber geometry mid-homologation? Or do they keep pressing the FIA and risk looking like they're playing politics again? Neither option is clean. And both are familiar. Because Ferrari has been here before. Raising concerns. Being dismissed. Watching others win. And Mercedes? Their silence is the most calculated move in the paddock. They haven't protested. They haven't commented. And according to multiple insiders, they might be running a very similar solution. If true, that puts Mercedes and Red Bull on one side, and everyone else on the other. Not just in performance, but in interpretation. A two-tier grid, built not on car design, but on who's willing to stretch the rulebook, and who isn't. And that's where things get dangerous. Because now the FIA has a new problem. If they intervene now, they risk hitting two of the most powerful teams in the sport. Teams that invested early. Teams that found a weakness in the regulations, and used it. But if they stay quiet, and Red Bull wins by half a second per lap in Bahrain, they'll face a backlash they can't contain. From Ferrari, from Audi, from Aston Martin, Sauber, Alpine, all of them waiting to see if the rules apply equally. And that leads us to a simple but brutal conclusion. This championship fight may already be compromised. Not by cheating, not by failure, but by indecision. The kind of indecision that doesn't show up in lap times, but defines seasons from the inside. Because if Red Bull wins early, and the loophole stays unchallenged, the rest of the grid will stop asking what's legal, and start asking what's allowed. So what happens now? Does the FIA act? Do they revise the test? Do they issue a clarification even after ignoring the early warnings? Or do they wait, hoping no one wins too obviously, or complains too loudly? Because once this story becomes public, once it hits headlines, press rooms, and pre-race interviews, the pressure changes. And the silence? Won't be a shield anymore. It'll be a target. Every engineer will ask the same question. Why didn't we do this first? And if Red Bull walks into Bahrain with a straight-line speed advantage, if Mercedes is right there with them, if Ferrari is chasing shadows again, then the damage is already done. It doesn't matter who's legal. It doesn't matter what's written in the rules. What matters is what's been tolerated. And that's the shift no one's prepared for. Because this isn't just about compression ratios. It's about what kind of Formula One we're about to enter. A sport where the fastest team wins? Or the one that reads the rulebook better and moves first, before the FIA figures it out? And here's the part that no team wants to admit, but every team is thinking. If the loophole is real, and Red Bull gets away with it, then everyone is going to start building engines the same way. By mid-season, the loophole won't be a trick. It'll be the standard. And if the FIA tries to close it then, it'll be too late. Just like it was in 2019. Just like it almost was in 2021. Because in Formula One, power isn't just in the engine. It's in interpretation. In who moves first. And in who the FIA is willing to stop. And that's why this might only be the beginning.